Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. I hope and pray, inshallah, that everybody is doing well. Welcome to our weekly study of Imam al-Nawawi's Arba'een, a collection of hadith that Imam Nawawi, rahimahullah, compiled, which has become known as one of the foundations of a faith study, a study of Islamic sciences and spirituality, that Imam Nawawi was credited with compiling this beautiful collection of ahadith that give the reader the benefit of having a holistic understanding of their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is our weekly study circle that Mustada, Fatima, Lette, and myself that we share to host for typically in person for the women of Roots, but now that we're online, it's for everybody who wants to benefit, inshallah. So we're on actually hadith number 8. Hadith number 8 is a very interesting hadith, and it gives a lot of clarity, but the clarity is only provided when the context is first also provided. So the clarity of this hadith is only given when the context of this hadith is also given. What's the context of this hadith? The context of this hadith is that when you read the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when you read his life and his biography, and you familiarize yourself with the experiences that the Muslims had, the Muslims, especially particularly those Muslims who lived in Mecca, but also those Muslims in general who never lived in Mecca, but also had to deal with the constant harassment and onslaught and threat coming from the tribes in Mecca and Quraysh in Mecca. You see that literally, and this is not an exaggeration, up until there was a peace treaty that was signed between the Meccans and between the Muslims in Medina, there was literally not a single night that would go by. It seems like a single month would go by. Not a single month would go by, except that there was concern of some sort of attack being launched on the Muslims by the Meccans, or some sort of conspiracy that included them. So whether it was like a direct attack, like the Battle of Badr or the Battle of Uhud, or whether it was some sort of conspiracy and some sort of collaboration with other tribes, like the Battle of the Trench, there was always this concern that so long as the Meccans lived in hostility towards the Muslims, that the Muslims were never truly safe, even though Medina, and Mecca were many hours away. I mean, if you drive there today, it's a 5-hour drive on a bus. It would take days of travel. So even though they were very far apart, there was always this constant threat of attack. The other thing that you have to understand with this hadith, and with every hadith, when you read any hadith, any statement of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that if you don't know the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then your understanding of hadith is always going to be hobbled. It's always going to be incomplete, because every hadith functions in the context of the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Every hadith functions in the context of his life, meaning what he says has to be held up against the backdrop of what he did. Because what we say, when I say something, that by definition is still in theory, right? It's still something that is theoretical because I've said it, right? If I told you I'm going to cook dinner, and then you're like, okay, great, you're going to cook dinner. And then after hearing that I'm going to cook dinner, your question was, well, how much are you going to cook? What are you going to cook? Is it going to be spicy? Is it going to be, what kind of ingredients are you going to use? Then when I cook the meal, right, and I can even tell you what I'm going to do, but when I cook the meal, when I've applied it, now you have a complete understanding of the statement that I meant when I said I'm going to cook dinner. So for some people, I'm going to cook dinner, or I'm going to take care of dinner. Let's say I'm going to take care of dinner, right, because it's a little bit more vague. For some people, that statement means I will cook. For some people, that means I'm going to warm up leftovers. For some people, that means I'm going to order takeout. So I'm going to take care of dinner. If I said that to my family, it could mean any of those things. I'm going to cook. I'm going to warm up leftovers. I'm going to order takeout, right? And only once I've completed that action do you now have a more accurate understanding of what I meant by that statement, because you've held up my statement against the backdrop of my actions, right? So when it comes to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, if a person does not look at the hadith against what he did, right? Against here meaning not in contrary to what he did, but with what he did. If you don't understand the statements of the Prophet ﷺ with an understanding of his life, of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, then you're going to have a very 1% accurate understanding of what his statements meant, right? And this is where a lot of people, very serious, shockwaves of faith are caused in the community, especially on the internet with rapid proliferation of knowledge. People read one hadith and they're like, my prophet said that. And they don't understand that when you understand his life better, when you've read a seerah book, when you've read a couple seerah books, then you're like, oh, okay, I know what he meant by that. I understand how he applied that. Now I know, because I'm holding up what he said hand in hand with what he did. Okay, just like the example I gave. Okay, so now that we understand that context, the context of number one, you have to understand the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and the context number two, which is you have to understand the reality that they lived, constantly being threatened by the existence of the Meccans. That their life, they were evicted, they were kicked out, they were tortured, some of them were killed. When they left, their property was stolen. This is sheer and utter oppression and abuse. Without question. Now you have the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ giving this statement. Okay, giving this statement. And when he says this statement, again, you're going to hear it and you're going to say, okay, but there's actually very beautiful meaning that's embedded into it when you understand the consequence and the follow-up of the statement. So what's the hadith? The hadith is narrated on Ibn Umar, who's the son of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhuma, that he said, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال أمرت أن أقاتل الناس حتى يشهدوا أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا ورسوله. That I was commanded to fight the people. And this is that phrase, the people, an-nasa, is the most confusing part of this hadith. And that's where you actually, when you look at the commentary, you see people like Ibn Hajar and others who commented on hadith, and that's their legacy, is the commentary that they left on hadith. You'll see what he meant by that. So umirtu an uqatila an-nasa hatta yashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna muhammadan rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he said that I was commanded to fight the people until they bore witness that there is nothing worthy of worship except for Allah, and that I am the messenger of Allah. Okay, that I am the messenger of Allah. And then he continued and he said, وَيُقِيمُ الصَّلَاةِ, and they establish prayer, وَيُؤْتُ الزَّكَاةِ, and they give their zakat. Okay, فَإِذَا فَعَلُوا ذَلِكَ, that when they do that, then he says, عَصَمُوا مِنِّي, that if they do that, then they will have gained protection from this command that I've given. Okay, دِمَاؤُهُمْ وَأَمْوَالُهُمْ إِلَّا بِحَقِّ الإسلام, that بِحَقِّ الإسلامِ, that they would have gained protection, that their lives and their property would be protected except through or only through Islam, in accordance with Islam. Okay, وَحِسَابُهُمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى, and their ultimate reckoning will be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so let's translate this hadith quickly then, not word by word like we did. The Prophet ﷺ said, I have been ordered to fight against the people until they bear witness that there is nothing worthy of worship except for Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger, until they establish salah, pay their zakat. And if they do, then they will be protected, and they will have protection of their lives and their property up until or as long as they are in accordance with Islam, and their true reckoning, their true judgment is with God alone. Okay, so this hadith, you can appreciate now that if a person were to quote this, if you were to see this hadith on Fox News, you're like, oh Lord, what's going to happen now, right? And even Muslim, non-Muslim, whoever, you read this and you're like, I have been ordered to fight against the people, right? And you wonder, you're like, this doesn't sound like the Islam that I know. This doesn't sound like the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that I know, that was constantly forgiving and compassionate. So what kind of statement is this? Why would he say this? Because it's a Sahih hadith. It's found in both Bukhari and Muslim. Why would he say this? This is one of the most principal discussions in really any Islamic studies, usul al-fiqh, understanding any text, is the discussion. One of the discussions is the generality or the specificity of something. The generality versus specificity. It's known as am and khas. So is something general? Is this to be applied to everybody? Or is this khas? Is this something that had a specific context in time or in people? It was speaking to a specific group or demographic, and so on. When you look at all the commentaries in this hadith, you find that the scholars unanimously said that this hadith was khas, it was specific, and it was talking. Ibn Daqiq and Ibn al-Hajar, they say that this hadith was talking specifically about those Meccans that had made life miserable for the Muslims. That the Prophet ﷺ, he was clarifying his stance with them. That I have been those people that have declared war on us, I have been commanded by Allah to fight against them. That I have not been, I have been commanded by Allah to engage in battle with these people, and not just to let them exist as a constant threat to our livelihood. That I'm not going to sit here in Medina and let these Meccans constantly threaten us, constantly wage war against us, constantly march with 5,000, 10,000 people to come and fight us, constantly develop and conspire against us with people in our neighborhood, Banu Nadir and others, constantly put our family, our children at risk. The Prophet ﷺ said, that's not the way that I roll, right? Now, obviously, he didn't use that language, but that's in English in 2020, that's how we would understand it. That's not how I'm going to do this. I have been ordered to fight these people and to engage in battle with them, right? Until they accept La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Until they accept it, okay? So this is something that the Prophet ﷺ was talking specifically about the mushrikeen of Mecca, those people of Mecca that had made his life so incredibly difficult. Now, remember when we talked about it's really important to study seerah? Okay, it's really, really important to study seerah, because when you study seerah, you learn some amazing things. So what are some of the lessons that we take from this? One of the most amazing things about this hadith is that, number one, it's narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, who is the son of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh. And Umar ibn al-Khattab was one of the greatest enemies of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Was one of his greatest enemies. Now, granted, he accepted Islam early. He accepted Islam in Mecca during the early days, and he went through a lot of the difficult moments that the Muslims went through. Umar ibn Khattab was there. But nevertheless, he was somebody that had dedicated a portion of his life to making the life of the Muslims very difficult. And as soon as he accepted Islam, as soon as he bore witness that there was nothing worthy of worship except for Allah, and that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was God's messenger, as soon as he testified that, and he began to pray and pay zakat, then all of his previous mistakes and all of his previous misgivings and all of his previous transgressions, all of them were forgiven, right? So this hadith is actually narrated by the son of somebody who used to roll with the mushrikeen. That Umar was one of those people. And so it's very beautiful to see that embedded in the chain of narration is this legacy of, if a person transforms, then the way that they were has no bearing on their future when it comes to the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's number one. Number two, Someone might say, well, Omar converted really early, right? Maybe this was the Prophet ﷺ in Medina once Hijrah was made and once the Muslims kind of had their own autonomous region. But it's interesting because you have people who made the Prophet ﷺ's life so painful. They caused him so many tears and so much pain. I mean, you can literally go down the list. You got Abu Sufyan and Hind, radiallahu anhuma, husband and wife, and Khalid ibn al-Walid, radiallahu an, in the Battle of Uhud. They were the reason why the Prophet ﷺ, and Wahshi, radiallahu an, those four were part of the reason why the Prophet ﷺ experienced such grief at the loss of his beloved uncle Hamza, radiallahu an. He moaned and groaned while he was weeping when he saw the lifeless, disfigured body of his beloved uncle, radiallahu an. And these people, Abu Sufyan, he was so disrespectful. Hind was so disrespectful before their conversion to Islam. And when they accepted Islam, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he accepted them as if they were pure angels with no misgivings. Wahshi, the same thing. The one who actually threw the spear that pierced into the side, the abdomen of Hamza radiallahu anh, Wahshi was forgiven. Khalid ibn al-Walid, who was the architect behind the comeback at Uhud that led to the pain and the loss that the Muslims experienced there, Khalid was forgiven. In fact, Khalid and Amr ibn As, they actually converted together. They accepted Islam together. Towards the very end of the mission, almost in the concluding piece, like the last tenth of the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they accepted Islam. And in this acceptance of Islam, they both asked, Ya Rasulullah, is everything that I've ever done, is it forgiven? Is Allah going to forgive me for everything that I've done? Because they know that the things that they had done before were literally things that the Prophet ﷺ was commanded to engage in war with these people for. That what they had done had necessitated that the Prophet ﷺ, he's speaking first person, umirtu, that I was commanded or I've been ordered, right? That he was told to go and engage in war with these people. So they said, Ya Rasulullah, you were told to fight us because of what we were doing to you. You were told to fight and battle us because of the pain and the difficulties and the torture we were putting your community through. And now we are accepting Islam. Ya Rasulullah, are we going to be forgiven for the things that we have done that necessitated God to command you to fight us? Imagine if God is commanding the messenger of God. There were many people who were not Muslim who lived in the vicinity of Medina that the Prophet ﷺ was not commanded to fight. There were many tribes, Bedouin tribes, all around Arabia, all around the peninsula, that were not Muslim, that the Prophet ﷺ was not commanded to fight. Why was he commanded to fight these specific people? Because they were an ever constant threat to the lives of those people, of the Muslims. And so they said, Ya Rasulullah, if we were people that God had commanded you to fight, will there ever be forgiveness for us? And the Prophet ﷺ said, of course. Once a person accepts this faith, everything that they've done is forgiven. Even if it was something that reciprocated warfare, even if it was something that brought upon a command of battle, as long as they accept, then they will be forgiven. And so in this hadith, the lesson that I want us to take away really is the power of faith and how faith transforms even people like Abu Jahl's son, Ikrimah, radiallahu an. Ikrimah bin Abi Jahl, when he saw, when the Muslims went and did Umrah al-Qada, when the Muslims went and did their Umrah after Hudaybiyah, the year after, and the Quraysh had to let the Muslims in for a few days to make their Umrah per their agreement. When he saw Bilal calling the adhan on top of the Kaaba, you know what Ikrimah said? Ikrimah, he said, I am so happy that my father is dead. I'm happy that Abu Jahl is dead. And he was talking to Safwan ibn Umayyah and others, his colleagues at the time. He said, I'm happy my father is dead. And they said, why? And he said, I would never have wanted him to go through the pain of seeing this man, Bilal, praising Allah and praising Muhammad as the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam I would have never wanted my father to see this happen while he was alive. Can you imagine saying that statement? Can you imagine Ikrimah saying that? Now, if that same person, let's say that you were one of the companions at the time and you heard him say that, and let's say that just a year later, Ikrimah came and he said to you, I want to accept Islam. What would your response be? Well, my response, I'd be like, you want to accept Islam? After what you said? After what you said? Right? Why don't we talk about what you said first? Why don't we make sure that you apologize for that before you come and accept Islam? Right? The conditions that we would put upon people, amazing. Allah and His Messenger didn't put conditions like that on people. Right? But Ikrimah, when he said that, he was in such a state of darkness. Amr bin al-As, before he accepted Islam, he was running away from the Muslims, but he was still trying to kill whoever he could that was Muslim. He was in Abyssinia, and the Prophet ﷺ sent a messenger to speak to Najashi and to call Ja'far bin Abi Talib and them to Medina. And when Amr bin al-As was there, and he saw that this messenger, and messengers, by the way, are supposed to be protected. This is an example of why he was commanded to fight them. When he saw that there was a messenger who was there who was Muslim, and messengers unanimously are like diplomats. In this day and age, when you have a diplomat in another country, even if there's war that's going to be fought, the country is supposed to send the diplomat home. Like it's against the international laws and rules of war to take that diplomat hostage. Right? That could be a really serious crime. So Amr bin al-As, when he sees this messenger, he asks the Najashi, he says to him, can you give him to me so I can kill him? And if I kill him, then it will send that message back to my brethren in Mecca, the Quraysh, and it will let them know that we still have something because I just killed the messenger of Muhammad ﷺ that he sent to Abyssinia. And Najashi was so furious that he actually punched Amr bin al-As in the face, and he knocked his nose, and he caused him to bleed. Right? This is why the Prophet ﷺ was commanded to fight them, because at any given moment, they were willing to kill a Muslim. At any given moment. And so Amr bin al-As, he experiences that, and the Najashi strikes him in the face. And then the Najashi says to him, what's wrong with you? You need to go and visit Muhammad ﷺ yourself. And Amr bin al-As said that when that happened, he said that it was a wake-up call. When I heard from the words from his mouth, it just shook me. And I went and I accepted this. And as soon as he accepted it, it's exactly the way the Prophet ﷺ said. Asamu minni, that he gained protection and he became part of the community now. Right? So this hadith actually goes from being one that can cause a lot of issues when people just read it on the surface level, to one that actually provides a lot of spiritual benefit when you read about it, which is what, if you see somebody that testifies that Allah is one and that Muhammad ﷺ is his messenger, and this person tries to pray and pays their zakat, they try to pray and try to pay their zakat, then this person, the Prophet ﷺ has said that this person is under his protection. And even if we're not living in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and while he was alive, they're still under his protection. They're still under the oath of the Prophet ﷺ. We need to be very careful not to transgress or oppress the rights of our fellow Muslims. We need to be careful not to oppress anybody. Absolutely. Muslims don't oppress people. We don't transgress people. The Prophet ﷺ said that even if a Muslim transgresses someone who is not Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ will stand as a witness for the person who is transgressed, even if he has to witness against the Muslim. But there is obviously a elevated sensitivity, especially when that person is a Muslim, because the Prophet ﷺ said they're under my protection. They're under my protection. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us that regard and that sanctity and that love for those people who share our belief. And we ask Allah ta'ala to give us that reverence and respect for their faith, and that when somebody accepts Islam, when somebody accepts this message, that nothing that they've done before, even if it's something that necessitated war, nothing that they've done before will be held against them by God or his messenger. And so we should not, as people who are not God and definitely not his messenger, that we should not hold it against them as well. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us. This is hadith number 8. This is hadith number 8 in Imam al-Nawawi's Arba'in. And inshallah, next week, Ustadha Fatima will be covering hadith number 9, which will be a hadith on, I can give you the hadith that she'll cover, inshallah. Very powerful hadith, very beautiful, on Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ma nahakum anhu fashtanibu," right? That whatever I have forbidden you to do, then you need to stay as far away as you can from it. Okay? وَمَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ. That he says that whatever I have ordered you to do, do it. Do it, مَا أَسْتَطَعْتُمْ, as much as you can. And then he says that, for verily it was only the excessive questioning and disagreeing of people before that destroyed them when they disagree with their prophet. So this is the hadith, inshallah, that Ustadha Fatima will be doing next week. Barakallahu feekum, everybody. Please stay safe, inshallah, and stay well. And I'll see you guys, inshallah, throughout the week with our Roots programming. Please keep in touch with us there. And check out our calendar if you want to see any other things that we're offering, rootsdfw.org/calendar. Inshallah, you'll be able to see all of our programs there. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.